His mind is in a different place. Will everybody please give him a little bit of space? Get a load of this train wreck.
All right, tell me you have no idea how gas prices are set without telling me you have no idea how gas prices are set. Joe Biden is the reason why gas prices are high. Dude, you have no fucking clue, all right? Listen, there's nothing that the U.S. government and Joe Biden can do to force privately owned companies to produce oil production in this country. The only thing they can do is issue permits. And Joe Biden has issued over 3,500 permits in his first year. Trump issued 2,600 in his first year. So you can't sit there and tell me that it's Joe Biden's fault that gas prices are high. He's doing everything that he can do, including tapping our national reserves. Okay? This is the fucking point. Oil producers are purposely not producing enough oil to drop the price because they're trying to recoup all the money that they lost during COVID. Okay? Why do you think the price dropped when COVID hit? Do you think it was because Trump was this great businessman who just negotiated a great deal? No. The supply was there and the demand dramatically dropped. So when the demand dropped, the price dropped. That's how it works. There's two ways to decrease the price per barrel. You either have to increase production or you have to cut the demand. And when COVID hit, the demand got cut, the price dropped. So the only thing that we can do is decrease our dependence on fossil fuels, which, by the way, we have to start doing anyway. This isn't a fucking choice. We only have about 47 years left of fossil fuel to pump out of the ground in this country. Okay? When my oldest daughter is 18, when she's retirement age, there's going to be no more fossil fuels to pump out of this fucking ground here. So we have to cut our dependence anyway. The only card that we have to play as a consumer to lower the price of oil is to decrease our demand. We got to start doing it anyway. We might as well fucking start now.
I'm trying not to get too involved in her makeup. I've given her tips saying, if you're with a makeup artist, tell her to do a little, keep your eyes always round and big so they pop, not the Chinese looking, because that's not good for her face.
Some Marxists would argue that intersectional feminism, or the idea of intersectionality, is like anti-Marxist, and I get it. I think this is sort of the reasoning for it. It's the idea that these systems of oppression are, they're all like equal to each other, or not equal, but there is a matrix, and they overlap and intertwine with each other. I think the difference with Marxism is that Marxists understand class to be, again, the primary form of oppression, like I've said before. And that's the thing. In real life, that's true. It doesn't matter what race you are or what gender you are or whatever. At the end of the day, your class is going to most significantly decide what your life looks like. Like, my life as an upper middle class, like suburbanite, very different from an Asian woman who is working class. It's going to be very, my position as a queer Asian person, very different from a trans woman, Asian sex worker on the streets. It's just fundamentally different, okay? So because we understand class to be a fucking, the primary axis of oppression on which other axes of oppression operate. This isn't to say that historically class has been like the first and only thing that oppresses people, obviously. I think that, Cedric Robinson kind of argues in Black Marxism that capitalism emerged through the creation of race, not the other way around. I think that's true as well. Radical feminists say that gendered oppression predates class oppression. I don't think that's true, but I understand why they would think that, because, historically throughout many societies, gendered oppression, like pre-colonial, pre-capitalism, gendered oppression was a very real thing. But I also think that capitalism emerged from gendered oppression. Like the separation of people into classes based on race or gender is an early form of, or a form itself of, class society. And as Lenin states, like the state is how class and class conflict and class struggle and stuff is sort of maintained and held at a fucking kettle. Like it's not, to maintain the structure of it. So it's not to say that class is more important than these things like race and gender and all these things, but rather that class is going to impact the way your life looks way more than those other things. And class is going to affect the relationship that your gender and race has with your life very significantly.
The recent withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan has triggered a very familiar imperial feminist talking point, that Western feminists ought to support the continued occupation of Afghanistan in the name of saving Afghan women. For feminists who are a bit older, this talking point is nothing new. We've heard it multiple times over the 2-decade-long occupation. But for younger, newer feminists, this may be their first time encountering it. Therefore, it's important to revisit post-colonial feminist critiques of this rhetoric, since proponents of this endless war will try to take advantage of these younger feminists in order to garner their support. Back in 2001, First Lady Laura Bush implored Americans to support U.S. military invasion of Afghanistan, specifically as a means for saving Afghan women and children from Taliban rule. This proved very effective at rallying white Western feminists behind the cause. Alongside the media's portrayal of the oppressed Muslim woman, signified by her veiled body and refusal or presumed inability to speak for herself, these feminists called for the end of gender apartheid in Afghanistan, and threw their uncritical support behind the invasion. They viewed it as necessary feminist action to liberate Afghan women. However, post-colonial feminists, transnational feminists, and feminists of color were very critical of this response. They criticized these pro-intervention feminists for reaffirming the project of U.S. imperialism and retaliatory violence as a means for maintaining U.S. power. In doing so, these feminists continued the West tradition of viewing the Middle East through the lens of Orientalism. Western feminists assume Western superiority through its ahistorical and Orientalist focus on the veil and gender segregation as symbolic of women's oppression, and its implicit assumption that the U.S. embodies gender equality and women's human rights. This Orientalist logic constructs an absolute difference between the West and the East, the self and the other. It does so by erasing the history and politics of Afghanistan and by projecting a cultural barbarity in need of a civilizing mission. The United States' interest in Afghanistan, of course, never had anything to do with women's rights. Rather, the invasion was motivated by the United States' need to control and dominate the country, both to secure valuable resources and expand the West's sphere of influence over the geographical region. This is further evident through the way that the U.S. military actually contributed to further violence against innocent Afghan civilians, and the fact that Western feminist and human rights organizations had no interest in actually collaborating with Afghan feminist groups, such as the Revolutionary Association of Women in Afghanistan. But despite the obvious that the US was weaponizing feminist rhetoric to support its anti-humanitarian and hegemonic aims, this rhetoric has been revived since the recent withdrawal of troops, both by the same political figures that first spewed this nonsense 20 years ago, and by newer faces of the so-called progressive movement. So it's important for the younger generation to learn from the feminists who have been wholeheartedly opposed to this imperial feminism for decades, so that none of us end up supporting violent and disastrous US occupation in the name of women's liberation ever again. Here's some further reading for learning more on the subject.
On my standpoint, it's not new to see this undercurrent of racism and certainly unconscious bias, but I think to see the changes that are being made right now is really, it's something that I look forward to being a part of. And being a part of using my voice in a way that I haven't been able to of late. So yeah, it's good to be home.
Road, so to speak, pussy you sour, never giving credit where it's due, cause you don't like pussy in power. Venom.
I just gotta push through and make it to the weekend, then I just gotta push through and make it to the fucking weekend until my heart does me a favor and stops beating.
Say it with me. Dear governing bodies, bureaucracies, and greedy corporations, you cannot advocate for the priority of our mental, physical health, wellness, and suicide prevention when capitalism and neoliberalism continue to stomp on us. You cannot set up sick day leave, intervention groups for mental health support and disability rights when capitalist and neoliberal systems are traumatizing and re-traumatizing us. You cannot disguise processes of healing while also simultaneously having systems of oppression coexist. Because if there is one thing we understand about capitalism and neoliberalism, it will work us to our very graves. It will work us beyond your toxic, performatively incentivized systems of oppression.